singing, and I'm set up for the light show.
Oh man.
I got my last 3 songs are about light, and he's not going to be here. So I don't know if I should turn the lights on for Mike or not. Put the lights on, Mike.
Are you doing the lights? Oh no. Hey, you know what? I was going to see my Oh, yes. Track lights. Fun stuff. Test, 1, 2.
And good. Yeah. All right, good morning, everybody. You don't have to fix that for me, Andy. It's good to see everybody here this morning, braving the nice snowstorm. We finally got some snow, which is a good thing. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 40, and probably 41 today, so if you want to go ahead and turn there. We're leaving behind the more scandalous parts, 38 and 39, so finally I get something that's a little more fun to discuss this morning. Bad thing about that is, though, there isn't a lot of new stuff to talk about. So everybody, this section that's familiar with most, if you've been in the church since you were a little kid, you've probably heard this story, I don't know, 1,000 times or so. I was fortunate I did not grow up in the church, so I first heard this as a young man, I guess. But no, it's one of my favorite sections in Genesis. I love this story, and there's a lot to it. So we'll go ahead and kick in. First off, it's another section about dreams. How many dreams do you think are mentioned in the Bible? Does anybody have an idea how often dreams are mentioned? Yeah, I don't know. Sure. 6? 6 times. Okay, do we hear more than 6? 10, okay. More than 10? Over 20. There's some over 20 times specifically. How many times do you think dreams were interpreted in the Bible? Where it's actually 7 dreams were interpreted in the Bible. That's a good number. I mean, 7, that's a good biblical number, good godly number. And that was very confident. So I'm going with that. I think Henry must know something. So 7 times. Can you name those 7 times? Over a period of time. Actually, as far as dream interpretation, there are several places where dreams are mentioned or someone having a dream, but only 2 people in 2 occasions, well, in the numbers that they interpreted, it may be 7 dreams. I'm trying to think now, but or 7 different ones. But only 2 people are listed in the Bible as actually interpreting dreams. That being Joseph and Daniel. And the dreams they interpret, it's interesting how God used those 2 men in the 2 circumstances that they were in. Both of them were in captivity, if you look back. And one was talking to leader of Egypt as part of his, and we'll get into that in chapter 41. The other one was Nebuchadnezzar and beyond it, as far as Daniel interpreting dreams. So talking to rulers or interpreting their dreams, But those are the only two. As far as dreams, other dreams that are mentioned, you have dreams of, there's pagans, heathens, different people talks about their dreams. Even in Genesis chapter 37, Joseph's dreams, they weren't interpreted. And if you remember back, he actually got into a lot of trouble because of his dreams. Because of those dreams that he had, he ended up where he's at now. He's in Egypt as a slave, but not just that, he's now a prisoner. And so that dream did not turn out, just mentioning his dreams didn't turn out well for him. And they weren't interpreted. We can see the interpretation or the results of those dreams, but at the time there was not an interpretation given. And really, if you think about it, it just kind of caused him to be in the circumstances that he is. Of course, all part of God's plan, as we've talked about throughout Genesis. Does anybody have any interesting dreams that they want to mention or talk about? Or we've done that a few times here, I guess, in the last several weeks. Does anybody have good dreams? Davey.
I was a police officer, and I was going through kicking in doors. I was kicking Lisa.
Okay. And
Since we only have Joseph and Daniel interpreting dreams, I'm not going to try to interpret what that means. I think there's some deep-seated issues, though, that may be there. I don't know. If you guys need some counseling, Chris is probably available for that. No, I mean, as far as interpreting dreams, if you think about it, there are a lot of books written, a lot of things given to try to help. Psychologists love dream interpretation because I think it's one of the easiest things, because you can give somebody, obviously if you're dreaming about kicking your wife, obviously there's some deep-seated psychological issues that you have, and you're married, so you need some counseling perhaps, or some troubles, or if you're there's anxiety dreams and different things. There's a lot of ways to interpret them, but only God, as far as truly interpreting them, God has given two people that we know of that ability. And you can come up with about anything. And I think that's why psychologists like to interpret dreams, is because they can come up with anything and then keep getting paid to talk to you about those. But for money, I guess I could interpret some dreams, but I'm not going to do that for anybody. Other places where dreams are mentioned, just one that I wanted to mention was in the New Testament. And we have, Matthew 27. We have Pilate is about to, he has Jesus in front of him. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." Not sure what her dream was or why, and don't know if, Pilate, he did wash his hands of the case, and Jesus was put to death anyway, regardless of whatever. But you can see that, for her dream, that dream came to her, and I don't know what the dream was or why, or if it was just her conscience that was talking to her. But that's kind of how dreams are mentioned in Scripture. But there are, again, those couple of occasions where someone has a dream and it's specifically interpreted, and it mentions the interpretation coming from God. So let's go ahead and we'll just dive into it. Genesis chapter 40. We'll go through 1 through 8. If you remember, Joseph has been thrown in prison, but the Lord is still with him. We know that while he's there. And it mentions that whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. So he has actually been put in charge, and the chief jailer has given over to him everything. I guess he's in charge of everything. So, verse 1, chapter 40, that came about after these things. So this is a while has passed while Joseph is in prison, that the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. And the captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. And he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your faces so sad today? Then they said to him, we've had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. Okay, these two officials, they've been thrown into prison. Joseph's been put in charge of them. One question is, why were they in prison? They have made Pharaoh furious. One is the chief cupbearer. He's the one that provides the wine to Pharaoh and is probably the wine taster for Pharaoh, in that he's testing it before Pharaoh drinks it. If it's poisoned, then he dies and Pharaoh doesn't. And the other one is provides the food for Pharaoh. I'm not sure if they do the tasting of the food in front of him. I guess if there's a lot of assassination attempts, perhaps that's the case. But Pharaoh is furious with these two. And as you see from the end of it, I mean, we can conjecture why they were in prison. Anybody have any ideas why they might have been in prison?
Mike?
We've just been studying about this in the other class for 9 weeks, I guess. We were studying a book by Ted Stewart called Solving the Exodus Mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And so his conclusion is that this Pharaoh is the first Pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, that Joseph would have entered Egypt in the year 1678, and 232 years later would have been the Exodus, 1446. But the king was Amenemhet I. He had led a coup against the previous dynasty and ended it. And there was an assassination attempt against Amenemhet I. And it was led by members of his staff in his palace. He wrote a letter to his son, which we still have, and in it he said he was asleep at night and there was a great battle between the guards, that is, his bodyguards, the Secret Service basically. And guard was fighting against guard. Now Potiphar, he happened to be in charge of the bodyguard, so he may have been in on this as well.
Okay.
But there were members of the staff that were thrown into prison because of this, and some were executed as well because of it. So he says that he thinks that fits in well with the story of why the cupbearer and the baker, since they, as he put it in his letter, those who wear my royal raiments and those who eat at my table were plotting against me. So anyway, you said, does anybody have an idea? Well, that's an idea that's in that book, Solving the Exodus Mystery.
Okay. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're in here, Mike. That's awesome. I would agree with that. It's just based on
What we see and what happens later, you would think that they were, them being two officials in his court, handling his wine and his food. Perhaps there was a plot against Pharaoh, assassination attempt. Wine is often used for assassination, food as well, poison, or, they're close to him, so they're able to, aid in an assassination attempt. It's fascinating that the captain of the bodyguard could have, was he part of it? Who knows? So it's interesting. Regardless, Joseph's in charge of them. They're in prison. There's, obviously they're in trouble as well. They have each of them have a dream. They are troubled by their dream. And they ask, and Joseph, actually you can see the kind of person he is, of, these fellow prisoners, he's in charge of them. He's asking them, why are you sad? What's wrong with you? I can tell that there's something troubling you. I know you're in a dungeon, and the other two guys are in the dungeon with you. You're in charge of them. Hey, what's the matter with you? What's bothering you guys? Oh, you had a bad dream. I've had dreams too. I ended up in prison because of it, or in slavery. I'd love to help you out. It goes to the mindset of Joseph, though, that he's concerned about them. Obviously, they're struggling. They're in a dungeon, so I would imagine they'd be dejected most days, but they were especially dejected this day. And he actually has care for them, is concerned about their well-being. Again, I think it speaks highly of the character of Joseph, that he asks them about that, how's your day going? Well, same old thing here in the dungeon, not pleasant. But they have these dreams. So let's go ahead and kick in. We'll continue on with the dreams. We'll get to the cupbearers first. 9 through 15. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As it was budding, its blossoms came out, its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. So Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. So Joseph, with the aid of God, and he had mentioned that all interpretations come from God. Here's the cupbearer's dream. The cupbearer, he says, is going to be restored in 3 days, and will be back. But he tells him, remember me. I shouldn't be in prison. I'm here. I was kidnapped out of the land while he was actually sold by his brothers into slavery. And he hadn't done anything wrong, be in a dungeon, but there he is. Then we have the second dream, 16 through 19. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head, and in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked foods for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Okay, nice pleasant dream. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Okay, not quite as pleasant as the cupbearer's dream. And he doesn't mention remember me and mention me to Pharaoh. But I think as you see, you have 2 dreams, both in 3 days. One thing, if someone interprets your dream for you, if you aren't delivering that interpretation from God, don't give them just 3 days for it to be resolved. because if it doesn't, then in 3 days' time you'll be discovered as a fraud in your interpretations. But in this case, God has given Joseph the ability to interpret these two dreams, and he provides. He says in 3 days, both of them in 3 days, something's going to happen. Both of them will have their head lifted up. One will be lifted up a little higher than the other ones, and actually removed. But I just like the phrase that's used. And I wonder, I can imagine the baker's like, yeah, lift up my head, but then it doesn't quite go as well. Because in the first one, it's lift up your head and restore you to office. The other one, lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree. So, again, not as pleasant. But 3 days' time, we'll see the results. Let's go ahead and we'll finish the chapter. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, so 3 days later, which was Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So, sounds like the chief baker was perhaps part of the plot to, or responsible for the attack on Pharaoh, was found out, and the cupbearer was innocent of the charges, and the interpretation that Joseph gave them 3 days' time was played out and exactly as he had said. Now, if someone had interpreted a dream for you and gave you, well, both of you, I'm sure you heard both of them, but cupbearer specifically, Joseph tells him, 3 days, you're going to be restored. Remember me when all this plays out. How would you react to that? Would you remember him, like immediately?
Maybe. I think it's like a lot of times with when good things happen in our life, do we immediately remember that it was God that did that for us? Or do we take it as our own, I did good during this time period? And it takes us a little bit to realize, oh, wait a minute, God actually blessed me. That wasn't me. I wonder if it's kind of the same thing where he just, oh, this was all me. I got out of this.
Yeah, perhaps. Anybody else?
There could be some fear there too, because Pharaoh did put him in prison. And now he's finally back, he's been restored, and he's probably walking real careful right now. So to bring up someone else that he put in prison.
Okay. That's a good point. Go ahead.
That was my thought too.
Okay, just the,
He may have been afraid to, he was restored, he was glad, but he was probably kind of walking on thin ice with Pharaoh still.
very well could have been. I mean, he had just been put in prison or been there for a little bit, and now he's celebrating. I think it's kind of a combination of both those things. Probably a little, walking a little nervously, but Davey, I think you're right also that a lot of times something good happens. It's like you kind of forget about, how perhaps you got there, who helped you along the way, and a lot of times God doesn't get the credit that he deserves in things, and he's back. Everything's fine for him, so you kind of forget about other people that may be struggling a little bit. Anybody else? Thoughts? Well, we have interpreted them. The dreams, God gave him that ability. It's highlighted, so you think, we see that God is still with Joseph, even though he's he's where he's at. I mean, it's mentioned that a couple times that God is with him, and no matter what his circumstances. But I can imagine that Joseph is a little upset because we see that it's 2 years past after the dream's been interpreted and the cupbearer
has been restored, and Joseph is still stuck in the dungeon. Let's go ahead and we'll move on. Chapter 41. It happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. Behold, he was standing by the Nile. So now Pharaoh's dreaming. But it's been two years since the cupbearer was restored. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. And then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now it came about in the morning that his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, and there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Okay, Pharaoh has a couple dreams, and they're bad enough they woke him up, the first one, and then he went back to sleep, had a second dream, and they're troubling, they're disturbing dreams to him. So we did what anybody does when they have a troubling dream. Let's call in, especially if you're Pharaoh, he can call anybody in to help him out. So he calls in the magicians, the wise men, tells them the dream, but they could not interpret them. Do you think they couldn't interpret them, or were they afraid to interpret them? Which way do you suppose it was? I can imagine Pharaoh. We don't know exactly the kind of person Pharaoh was, but plots against him led to a couple people, being put in prison. I'm sure they're not the only 2 people that Pharaoh had put in prison or executed. So if your wise men and magicians and everyone come in, are they really going to be eager to say, yeah, I know exactly what your dream is. In a couple days here, or 7 days, this is what's going to happen, or whatever. I can imagine they were a little slow to give actual, they're probably in their wise way, just kind of contemplating, yeah, it's nice dreams, Pharaoh. Let me go and consult with the spirits or whatever, and we'll get back to you on that. Scott, you had a comment?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past God preventing them from having any knowledge.
Well,
You can see the purpose throughout this. There is a definite plan, a definite purpose going here. So yeah, there's no way they're going to be able to give an answer. I think there's some fear for them to
do it as well. Go ahead, Ron.
I was going to say the track record for doing this job wasn't too great. Because go back to Nebuchadnezzar. He had a dream. He wouldn't even tell him what it was. He said, "You tell me." If you don't tell me, I'm going to tell you.
And I'm sure that maybe Pharaoh and getting his dreams interpreted be a little similar to, I would say more similar to that with Nebuchadnezzar. So, Daniel, again, with God's help, was able to tell him what his dream was and interpret it. So that, took it even a step further. But, yeah, good point.
Go ahead.
I think these guys had some pretty significant powers. Later on in the book of Exodus, the wise men of Egypt were able to actually reproduce the first couple of miracles that Moses and Aaron performed before Pharaoh. So they did have something of supernatural powers at their beck and call. So it's, I kind of think that Scott's probably right. God was preventing them from being able to interpret the dream.
Okay, good point. Going to Exodus exactly. I mean, and that's what the pharaohs did. They brought in their magicians and wise men to interpret. So these people had, they had something, or you wouldn't call on them. So, yeah, blocked by God, and we know that God has a plan in this. I mean, that's, we know the rest of the story. So, whether it was, they were afraid to give an answer, or they just didn't know, or they were blocked by God, or they just, for whatever reason, they were not able to interpret these dreams. 9 through 13. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. And we had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he had interpreted according to his own dream. And it came about that just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Okay, the chief cupbearer hears the dream of Pharaoh, hears him saying, and he remembers Joseph. So everything in its proper time. Again, God's providence and how God works to achieve his end. Even though it's been 2 years now, the chief cupbearer is willing to mention Joseph. Hey, I got the perfect guy for you to tell you what your dreams are, what they mean, because he did it for me and the chief baker, and they came about just as he had interpreted for us. And you can just see the cupbearer as he comes before him. He says, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Did he do anything wrong, do you suppose? Or when you approach Pharaoh, you don't tell Pharaoh, when you wrongly put me in the dungeon but then restored me, I had a dream, and this kid told me about it. So I like the way he approaches Pharaoh here. I had these offenses, and if I would like to make mention of them if I can. I don't know. Just seems as you're approaching Pharaoh, kind of that careful way that you would do it. But it mentions, Pharaoh was furious. So I imagine you wouldn't want to have him recall exactly why he was furious or what was going on, but he does remember Joseph and give him the name of Joseph and tell him what is going on. I don't know. I just like the way that he approaches him here and talks to him. But Pharaoh, being Pharaoh, he's able to do whatever he wants pretty much, and he's had these troubling dreams. So first off, he calls for Joseph. So let's go ahead and read that, 14 through 24. Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. They hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon, and when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. Behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. And lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I had never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. And yet, when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I saw also in my dream, and behold, 7 ears, full and good, came up on a single stalk. And lo, 7 ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Okay, so Pharaoh tells Joseph the dreams. I like, so they bring Joseph out of the dungeon, but he has to shave and clean up a little bit before. He's been in, don't have a idea exactly how long he'd been in the dungeons at this point, but you can imagine he may have been a little scruffy in appearance and perhaps not as clean and well kempt as he should be to enter into Pharaoh's presence. So they do have to clean him up. I think they cleaned him up quick though, because Pharaoh's eager to get his dreams interpreted. And it'd been, again, it's years that he's been in prison. Not exactly sure how many years. He was in Potiphar's house for several years, and now in the dungeon for a few years in the dungeon for several. And it's 2 years since the cupbearer and chief baker were in there, so we know it's been a considerable amount of time. But Joseph then also answers, because Pharaoh's, hey, I hear you're the guy that can interpret dreams. But Joseph says, it's not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So he is confident that God is going to assist him. God has been with him throughout this time, even throughout his circumstances. Now he's going before Pharaoh, and he's going to interpret, or God's going to assist him in interpreting these dreams. So if Joseph gets it wrong, what's going to happen to Joseph? Yeah, it's not going to be pretty for Joseph. You can imagine, but Joseph has confidence in God. You can see his faith. You can see his trust throughout his time. And as he comes before Pharaoh, he declares to him, yeah, I'll listen to your dream, but God is going to give the interpretation, and God will give a favorable interpretation for you. So he's trusting that God is going to assist him in this case, just as he's assisted him
throughout his time.
I think that it's really bold for him to have said God will provide it, because he's also challenging who Pharaoh is. When you think about what Pharaoh's position is in Egypt, he is the god of that country. And so he's saying God's going to provide this, which we see Pharaoh's favorable to this, but in other instances, we also see, why is your God better than me?
Right.
So Joseph doesn't even hold back. He's just saying, I'm not doing it, God's doing it. But Pharaoh doesn't challenge him here, which I think is really interesting about it. But having come from two different, countries, two different beliefs, like he's saying, my God is bigger than you, which I think is just, it kind of just gets glossed over here. That's like, okay, cool, I'll listen to it, but that's something that's offensive to Pharaoh later in Exodus.
It's an excellent point. Different Pharaoh, but yeah, absolutely. Joseph is declaring his God, the preeminence of his God, the ability of his God to interpret, and how his God rules and is really in control of everything. Excellent point. Excellent point. And Pharaoh doesn't challenge that, does he? He doesn't say anything. He's so troubled, which shows that he knows he's not. I mean, they're considered God, but he knows that he's not. If there's anybody that knows that they're not God, Pharaoh knows that he's not. Any of these rulers that put that on themselves, he's not able to interpret the dream. He's not able to, really figure out what's going on, and he's troubled by it. So God's power is shining forth here, and Joseph highlights that. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so when I used to teach government, I would start out with a quick little thing about the evolution of government. And I made the point that when you had when kings evolved, you had a single individual with all the power. The first power they had was life and death. And that was enough to motivate most people. But it wasn't long before, Egypt's the best example, before they associated the ruler, the Pharaoh, as being the descendant or the sun god Ra. Well, then you complete your whole power structure there. And so, but like, that's a very good point that, and deep down inside they knew, but it was a useful tool.
Yeah. You do have
certain power. You have the power of life and death over all of your subject. You have a lot, but in this case, he didn't have power to even figure out what his dreams were. And it was bad enough to trouble him, and all the people that he had called in to hear them, none of them were able to give him an answer, or were willing to give him an answer. But Joseph does, and so let's get to the interpretation here. Joseph said to Pharaoh, verse 25, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, the 7 good years are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. And the 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years. The 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God. God will quickly bring it about. And now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority. Let them guard it, and let the food become as a reserve from the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish during the famine. So Joseph interprets the dream, and the second reading of the dream, I like it. There's a lot more detail to it about the ugliness and the gauntness of the cows. They're very poor, very ugly, unlike anything. And after they eat the other cows, they're just as ugly and skinny and poor as just as they were when they came out. Again, the interpretation: 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. So bad a famine that it's going to eliminate from memory the 7 years of abundance. There's going to be nothing left, basically. Dreams interpreted. And Joseph even, he tells him, I think it goes back to Shelby's comment, he tells him in verse 32, you have 2 dreams that are basically, it's the same dream, a little different, but they mean the exact same thing. And that just means that God has determined that this is going to happen. And it's quickly going to occur. So Pharaoh, God is in charge here. This is what's going to happen. You've had this dream. God has determined it. And he even gives him a way to take care of it. You need someone that's wise, discerning, to put over the land. And you need to start storing up some food. Get prepared during the 7 years of abundance. So we have 7 years going. Do you think Joseph, when he tells Pharaoh, you got to look for a man that's discerning and wise and put him over the land of Egypt, do you think Joseph had someone in mind for that job? Go ahead, Mike.
So I'll keep annoying you with the book that we were studying. But Amenemhet I was severely wounded in the assassination attempt, and he never ruled solely again. His son, Sesostris I, began a joint rule with him. his father warned him, don't trust anybody. Don't trust any of our kinsmen, any of our countrymen. Don't rush into assigning someone else to be your vizier. That's your advisor.
Right.
And so Amenemhet had an advisor, but he was executed for some reason. And Sesostris I waited 2 years before he appointed a vizier because he was very cautious. And the vizier that he appointed in history was a foreigner, and he was never named in Egyptian history. His name was never given. And so Joseph suggests, hey, maybe it's time now for you to assign someone to be your advisor. And that was part of the interpretation. I think God told him to tell that to the Pharaoh, because Sesostris goes, wow, I've been waiting and looking for somebody that's wise and discerning, and now I found somebody that's wise and discerning. And so the advisor of Sesostris I advised him to set up a different way of organizing the rule over the land, to appoint governors in all the various states or nomes, which is what Joseph advises here. That's what they did in history. They had 7 years of plenty in which things were stored up during the reign of Sesostris I, and then there were 7 years of terrible famine afterwards. It all fits in line with what the story is here. So I know that's annoying,
No,
but you're all going, let's just stick with the Bible, can we? But anyway, I just thought I'd mention it.
no, it's good. I mean,
The historical fact, I mean, it lines up with what the Bible is telling us. So when we see things, like that, I think it's fascinating. John, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think I agree with Mike. I think these are words that God put in Joseph's mouth. It's extremely gutsy to walk into someone else's office and then tell them how to do their job, which is not in the dream that Pharaoh related to Joseph at all.
right.
So for Joseph, who still is likely a pretty young guy, to walk in and say, here's what your dream means, and here's what you need to do to run your country to be successful in hard times that are coming as a young man. The young men that have walked into my office and brought suggestions to me, I haven't seen wisdom like that out of young men. It's just not something that young guys say. So I'm confident that this is God taking advantage of the opportunity that he created to execute his plan to take care of Joseph. I don't think Joseph had any idea. I think he was just like,
Giving him the words.
That God wanted him to provide for him. All right, Scott, then DJ.
DJ and Mike, and we've got to go.
Take some of the heat off the mic. It was very common in monarchies to appoint capable foreigners to very important jobs. A very good biblical example is the Ethiopian eunuch. Because not only did you have their capabilities, if they did bad, you could kill them. No big deal. No justice system to worry about.
Yeah, which made Joseph's walking in. Yeah, God obviously was with him to provide him, because he gives an unfavorable report or anything else and says anything. Yeah, he's easily killed. DJ.
The first time that Joseph kind of props himself up with dreams, relating it to his brothers, he ended up not in a good way, getting being thrown into a pit and sold into slavery. And so I think he would be very hesitant to try propping himself up with dreams again. So I think I agree with John. This is what God told him to tell Pharaoh.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, hopefully he had learned the danger of just, because he doesn't mention his own dreams anymore. You notice he's just helping other people out. So, all right, I think we are out of time.
Mark has one last comment.
Then we'll be dismissed.
One last comment. It's interesting to note that both Pharaoh and Potiphar believed in God. It says that right there, what we just read. And that's why Potiphar put him in charge of his house. But just like Pharaoh, he didn't believe in God as much as Joseph. Because Potiphar, for example, believed his wife more than he did in God. But he knew Joseph was a man of God, and so does Pharaoh. He said, the Spirit of God is in this man. And why else did he jump in there and accept what he said, told him?
Obviously, they're seeing that God is working with Joseph. I mean, yeah, they wouldn't put him
They
in
just
charge
don't
of
believe
things.
as much as Joseph.
They did not. But fortunately, Joseph had the faith in God, and we'll see how all of it plays out here over the next, not for the next 2 weeks. We have a person coming in to talk about the student center in Laramie next week. Following week is the youth rally. It's already here, 2 weeks. And so we'll resume talking about Joseph
in Egypt in 3 weeks. So everybody have a good, let's get ready for worship at this time.